So I'm making a constant called dB size. Now, this is one of the rare cases where we're going to have a global constant. Okay, now I got on the wheel before, right, about global variables, and he's not the only one. In this case, to cut down on the amount of stuff that we're passing, and it is the same. So we are going to have a global constant and 20. So our database, quote unquote, right? Our database can hold no more than 20 records. Okay. So now here I'm going to declare an array of strings called book title, and it's empty. There's nothing, we can have 20 strings in there. Okay. Now the other thing is, well, let's go ahead and have an integer for the quantity on hand. Let's see. I want to keep these the same. This is using classes, so quantity on hand. We actually spelled that out. Okay. Quantity on hand. And here we'll use book time. Now, when the other limitation of arrays is what? Is that, can I store strings and integers in the same array? No, I cannot. So we have this idea of something called parallel arrays. Okay. So a parallel array means that the two arrays have the same number of elements. They're designed to work together. Okay? So now, in your mind, what I want you to think about is, okay, we're going to make our program such that the indexes, in this case, what are the indexes? What's the smallest index of these two arrays?
0.
What's the largest index? Valid index, 19. So we're going to, with a parallel arrays, the indexes form a relationship between the two different arrays. So index 0 for book title is going to be the first book, and that book, the quantity on hand that we have of that book in the store, is going to be at index 0 as well. Does that make sense? So the indices are what keeps the relationship built. Now it's up to you, the programmer, to make sure that you maintain those relationships. Okay? So here is my array of titles, and I'm just going to abbreviate BT. Okay? So index 0, ... index 19. Okay, you guys want the light back on? Okay, so here, let's just say maybe that book's Star Wars. Okay? So my quantity on hand, which is integers, index 0, maybe we have 5 of those books. Okay? So what we're going to do now is, what I'm going to do for you, okay, is we're going to create a function, the reports function. Okay? Now, inside the reports function is also a menu that calls add book. Okay? Now, for now though, I'm going to let's see, we have to get these books into the inventory. So for now, I'm going to hard code. Okay, I'm going to hard code the first book, So let's say that textbooks. Where's the database? Is that it there? So our first book is Star Wars, and we have 5 on hand. Okay. Now again, I'm hard coding the Star Wars. I thought I'd get the case. And there's 5 books in there. Now, we need another variable. Let's say that, let's see. I'm sitting here going through my options here. Let's make the book info function. So here, the book info function, I'm going to define it after my DB size. Because if I don't define it after, then book info won't know what DB size is. If I put book info above DB size, now here in this case, remember what I said, I'm going to start us off slowly, and we have a return statement. Okay. Now book info, all that we're going to do is we're going to print a book. Okay, but how do we get that information to it? Okay, so let's say that I'm going to bypass for now. Okay, let's say that when we go to inventory database module, we're going to call book info. Now later, you're going to have to call it, inventory. But for right now, we're going to short circuit things a little, just so that you can see a working example. So here, what we'll do inside our case statement is case 2. Instead of saying you chose option 2, we're going to call book info. And we just get rid of these. Okay. Now, like I said, this function call is only temporary. Okay. Later, we will call inventory menu. Function inventory menu. Okay? But book info is relatively simple. Now, if I run this, okay, we see out, let's see, the title. Let's do the, let's see out the title. And let's see out the quantity on hand. Okay, so right now when this program runs, okay, book info, when I call it, it doesn't have access to our arrays. Okay, but let's go ahead and run it. We have a warning. Yep, that's fine. So, but if I run this, Okay, and if I go to number 2, inventory database module, you'll see that, well, it printed it so fast that it cleared the screen real quick, right? So we're going to want to hold that whenever we come back, or at the end of so I'm putting the logic to hold it inside my switch statement, not inside book info, because it's not book info's problem that I cleared the screen so fast that I couldn't see it. Okay. So here, so we'll pause the screen there. So now if I run inventory database module, you see I get, book info was called. Now I'm back in book info, returned, okay? And it came back to my menu, okay, for to exit. So let's take a look at the code again. So here, book info, right, when I call it, as soon as book info finishes, what happens is that during this function call, the computer, right, the operating system, the compiler, okay, but the operating system, it keeps track of where to return to when book info is finished, line 82, okay? So when book info is run, okay, it didn't take any parameters and it's not returning anything. Notice I did put a return statement here. This would work exactly the same if I took that statement out. But I want you guys to put your return statements in there always. Just so it sticks home the fact that this guy does not come back and restart all over again. Our code actually returns. Now, because it's a void function, it means it doesn't return a value. This is optional. Okay? All right, now the question is, how do book info needs to be able to print something, right? So I'm gonna have it print title. And I'm gonna have it print quantity, right? Now, these are going to be local variables, okay? Now, I need you guys to try to, I know this is maybe boring for you. If I were to make a string here, I want you guys to see this. String title equals blah, right? And integer quantity equals 10. Does everybody understand that those two variables are local to that function? Okay, the scope of those two variables are local to this function. And, but they are declared and initialized here. I can do the same thing. Similar thing here. Instead, I can say, all right, you know what, pass me a string and call it title. You could say, call it pizza, right? I like pizza. You can call it anything you want, okay? I'm going to call it title. You know what, for that matter, I'm going to call it pizza, just to prove a point. And integer size of the universe, okay? Some completely absurd variable name. The variable names that are here. So here, what this is saying is when you call this function, you have to pass it a string and you have to pass it an integer. The variable names themselves don't matter. They don't need to be matched up. That's one of the key things to remember. Okay? And I'm going to prove it. Now, what is so when I invoke that function, I'm going to pass it. I'm not passing my strings, my arrays. I want to pass an element out of that array. Well, we want to pass the first element. Okay, so that's going to be book title sub 0. Okay, and then quantity on. Let me make sure I have these names right. Book title and quantity on hand. Quantity on hand, subscript 0. Okay? On purpose, I named those variable names and those functions something crazy. Okay? Something crazy. So that you don't think that I have to call it book title. I don't have to call it book title inside there. I don't have to call it quantity on hand inside there. Okay? So here I'm going to pass, these are arguments. Okay? So the only thing that matters is that the data types are going to match the data types here. Okay? Of course, that's not going to work because I have to rename these. Okay, we're going to recompile it. Now we leave the warning. The warning's gone for not using. And then if I jump to inventory database, it has Star Wars and quantity on hand is 5. Okay? Now, I'm going to go back and make those names something a little bit more realistic, like title. And quantity on hand, or QOH. So here I'm only passing one string and I'm passing one integer. Okay? Because book info's job is just to print the information about a particular book, not the whole thing. Okay? All right, questions so far? You may have any questions. Is this rocket science yet? Is this something new? Have you guys ever seen this before? Anybody here not seen this before? Okay, good. So, all right, now then, we need another variable because let's say that I want to, actually print every single book, right? Again, this is only temporary, ARY. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to loop through this array. So integer I equals 0, I less than what?
20.
Well, okay, now in that case we have a constant defined that holds it, right? db size. But what happens if I do this?
Oh, it's going to go out of bounds.
Well, it won't go out of bounds. You know, because the array has been reserved. The array's been reserved. But it's not going to work the way that we were hoping. Okay. So there I'm calling this for loop, and instead of passing sub I, or 0, I need to pass sub I. So that's going to go through that entire array. But how many books are in that array? 1. So what do? We need to, but let's see what this does first before we fix the problem. Let's witness the problem. This is, useless. We have one piece of valuable data. Well, we need to have another variable, a counter for book count. Okay, book count. So here, integer, book count. Now in our case, since I have hard-coded one book in there, then I need to initialize that to be a 1. Now, later on, you guys are going to, in your inventory function, you're going to, which calls the add book function, okay, three functions deep, you're actually going to enter that stuff later. Right now, we're skipping all that in between so that I can teach you guys how to use functions, okay? Now, this function does not return any values, all right? Let's say that I wanted to add a second book here. The second one is Empire Strikes Back. All right, and we're going to hard code Empire Strikes Back. Okay, and quantity on hand was 2. Okay, so here now, because I increased the number of books in there, or the records, let's just say records, right? And, you know, sometimes I consider renaming that book, well, these are not books, right, as in the number, how can I say, that array doesn't hold one book for each element, right? Each one has a quantity on hand. So sometimes students get confused and think that if I add a new book or delete a book, I have to delete the record. No, because a record, it's possible to have a quantity on hand of 0. Okay, doesn't mean that you delete it. All right, so anyways, here book count is 2, and so now when we call this, instead of saying I less than DB size, we say I less than book count, so that we don't waste and get bad data. So let's compile this, run it, and boom, there we go. Okay, so we looped through using a for loop. I know how many times I want to loop. How many? How many books that I've added to my inventory. All right, questions?
Would it be easier just to use a vector and then like use the size?
Well, you still got to use the size. You got to use something, right? If you want to for this assignment, if you guys want to use vectors, that's fine. Just know that in CS1B, your CS1B instructor may or may not be using vectors in their class and expects you to understand how to do this with arrays. Okay? The one thing that you're going to have to do, and actually I'll tell you, let me take that back. Later on in CS1B, not this class, in CS1B, you have to print reports and sort by the price of the book. Print the most expensive books first. Vectors allow you to it has its own sorting function, and we want you to learn how to learn those sorting algorithms yourself. Okay? So we don't want to bypass that. All right. Now, I see folks are falling asleep, and I don't blame them. Okay? But the first lesson today about functions that I need you to understand is, first of all, this is called the definition. All right, let me hit the light for a moment. The function has got to be defined before we get into our int main. This is a global constant because it exists before this function, and it's accessible to any block of code underneath it, any function or the int main. So if I needed to, I could have used DB size inside here, but there's no reason to use it because book info is the simplest function in the Serendipity project. Okay. Now, like I said, we have skipped the two middle layers between book info and main menu. Okay? But again, like I said, that's just to teach the concepts here. Okay? And one last thing I'm going to show you, and then we're going to talk about the problems that are due coming up. Remember, I said before that as these functions get bigger, right? As these functions get bigger, int main gets pushed down farther. Okay, and after a while, you get tired of paging down 7, 8 pages of function code in order to get to the driver. Okay, so what we'll do, and this will lead up to you in CS1B when I teach you how to make these external functions. This is called a prototype. And what a prototype does is it says to the compiler later on, string and integer. I'm going to create a function that takes an argument of a string and an integer. Okay? And doesn't return anything. Okay? So now if I never call this function, by the way, let me I'm going to make another one as well called what was it, inventory menu? Okay. This function here doesn't exist, right? I haven't written it. And as long as I don't call it, as long as I don't invoke that function, compiler doesn't mind. Okay? So what we can do is we can actually start to preface reports, and then inside here, each of these actually have submenus, or void add book, and I'm just going off memory, void delete book, void search or lookup or book lookups. I forget what it is. All right, but these are all functions that will later get defined. So imagine about 100 lines of code, about 50 lines of code, about 50 lines of code. Okay, this thing's, that int main's getting pushed down. But by having these prototypes listed first, then here out, now you have to remember, make sure that you put your functions outside of your block for your int main. So now you're like, well, what about the other functions? Like I said, it doesn't matter if they're not defined. If you don't call them, having these prototypes in here, they don't. The compiler doesn't mind. Okay, for the compile, find a.out. Whoops, main. Enter choice, 2, print my 2 books and quit. Now, you know what, I'm gonna press one last thing. Oh, come on. Let's say that this would be reports. So let's say that I actually do want, instead of calling book info here, that I actually do want to call inventory menu. Okay? What does inventory menu need to be able to work? It needs those arrays. And it needs the book count, right? So I would have to pass book title. So here I'm passing an array called the book title, and the other one was what? Quantity on hand. And I need to pass book count. So here I'm actually passing arguments. Here I'm passing an array, and an integer. So inventory menu now, if I don't put this in here, so this needs to be a string array. I don't have to title it. Though if I do title this, I can call it pizza. The compiler doesn't, it ignores the variable name. But it's good, it is a good practice to put that in here. That way you don't forget. Okay, this is going to be book count. This is going to be called quantity, or QOH, right? And this one's going to be called, maybe this is book title. Right? Notice these names don't exist. Title. It's actually called book title. It doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This is just cosmetic. Okay? So here, I've got inventory menu, and I'm going to make, inventory menu doesn't return anything. Inventory menu, but it takes the string. Now this is what I'm going to call it inside here. So string title, integer quantity on hand, and integer count, right? I'm intentionally using different variables just so you guys know that it doesn't matter. Now here, what we probably should do is we should do that clear screen that Mitch taught us. Now inventory menu, as you know, is supposed to have a menu in it, okay? But for the time being, it's menu to be added later, okay? Simulating, you know what, this is supposed to be reports. Simulating listing report. All right, I need to change this to reports, not inventory menu. All right, so we're going to clear the screen. Then I have a for loop, and in that for loop, I'm going to go through book count, and we're going to call book info, passing it title. See, I have to use the local, whatever I called it locally. And it doesn't need count. Okay. All right, and then we need to return. When we're done, we need to return. And if you remember, we had to so here I'm calling reports from within main, passing it my two arrays and my book count, and what was that? What did I just do? And then whenever we're done, and then inside here, we're calling book info in a for loop to print everything. So now we're getting a little bit closer, right? That's reports, and this guy up here needs to be called reports, not inventory menu. We've already simulated adding the books. Can't have two of these. All right, so now then, if we compile this, okay, discard, I have to notice that variable did not exist, so I need to create it. here actually, alright, so let's. Alright, there we go. So, inventory database module is going to call the reports module, which clear the screen and call book info in the for loop. So, as this thing is building, right, we're going deeper and deeper. And, I mean, that's, folks, this is really the best way that we can knock out two birds with one stone. Okay? Notice, so when I came back from reports, or when I came back from book info, so, something called a trace, either a call graph or a trace graph. I have, what we did so far, okay, is we took, we had inside of our int main, it called reports. Reports called book info. So this guy called book info in a loop. So when book info finishes, hit that return statement or hits the end of that function, it comes back into reports and goes through a second time, right? And prints the second book, comes back up. That for loop, which is being controlled by book count, finishes. And then reports is coming back up to my main menu, which is resuming operation. All right, questions about this? Yes?
Not really related to that, but regarding like functions, is it accessible on the slides on Canvas right now?
Oh, the slide deck? I don't think so. I don't think I've got some slide decks to put up there. Yeah. So I'll do that. It won't be this evening, because this evening I'm wasted with I have 3 more classes to teach today. It'll be tomorrow. I'll post them up tomorrow. All right. The assignments that are due next class or coming up.